Hi, I'm Scott.
And I'm Jamie.
And welcome to God or Not, the podcast where truth springs from argument among friends. This is episode 13. And coming up, Jamie and I will be talking about Prejudice. Deja vu. Seems like we've done this one already. Also in this episode, we have the God or Not book club and Spin the Wheel. So grab your popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the center ring. This is the God or Not podcast. We're in for a great night of civil discourse here as these two warriors are revved up and ready to go. And now, let's get ready to dialogue!
All right, Jamie, how you doing today?
I'm
How's it
well.
going?
Yourself, Scott? Yeah.
I'm doing good.
Good.
It's a good week. It's been a little cold here lately, but otherwise we've been doing pretty good. How's the weather in Ohio these days? What's your typical winter like?
Boy, I know, knock on wood here, it's been pretty mild. January, February usually get hit pretty good. But so far, man, it's been really, the last probably 3 or 4 winters have been really, it's like feast or famine in Ohio.
Right.
It's like we're either getting pounded like we're Buffalo or it's super mild. And so far this winter, it's been fairly mild. So plus
I'm not familiar with that phrase there. Pounded like we're Buffalo. Is that like a lot?
Well, Buffalo gets feet and feet and feet of snow. I mean, I have my cousin
Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
Like the city Buffalo.
Yeah.
I pictured like this big bison, and somebody hitting it. I was like,
No.
what is that? That is the obscurest thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah. No animals were hurt in the making of this.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah. So
okay. All right.
And
hey,
I'm in Columbus now. And Columbus is a little further south, in middle of Ohio, where I had lived in the previous, 3 or 4 years ago, was northeastern Ohio, and we had a little bit of a snow belt. And so when we got snow, we usually got a lot more snow than a lot of Ohio. But now I'm out of there, and it's much more mild here in Columbus. I'm okay with that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, I got a little tidbit of news here for you. I almost told you earlier, but I saved it until now. And as of this recording, we have now crossed over 1,000 downloads.
Woo!
So hooray for us.
Yeah.
It only took us 12 episodes to get there, but we do what we can do, right?
And both of us downloading at least 50 episodes each.
Right. Well,
time.
that was assumed, right? So we got to figure at least 100 of those are legit, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Okay, so last time we were talking about Prejudice, and as it turns out, it went a little bit longer than it went much longer than I was expecting.
A lot longer, yeah.
I was expecting it to be just kind of, we're just touching on little bits and pieces here and there, but we got into some things. We did cut into that last discussion to when we were talking about sexism in the Bible, and so we're gonna readdress that. We're gonna do that again at a later time when we can devote a little bit more time to it.
Yes.
But then also, even after the editing that we did, it was still over a couple hours long, and so we decided to chop it in half, and we did half last week, and so we're gonna do the other half this week, and I don't know anything. So, but we are gonna talk about like different. I think we're gonna address like LGBT stuff and other aspects of Prejudice. Any comments before we get rolling on this?
It was fairly feisty in part 1, and I think if I remember correctly, part 2 is probably just as good. I think something that our listeners should know too is that during this, especially this particular discussion, I feel like almost every aspect of Prejudice could have been its own podcast. I mean, because it was so meaty. Yeah. So I think it's probably safe for me to say, to talk for you as well when I say this, that our opinions and thoughts on each one of these particular aspects of Prejudice are more rich and more full than what you're hearing now.
That's true. That's true.
We didn't
it's kind of a
flush
sampler.
everything out. Yeah, we couldn't because we would still be here. And this is like a week later, So just know that later on down the line here, probably each one of these will have its own podcast where we could flush everything out and talk in more depth about it.
Well, I think that's a sign of a good conversation is when it sparks other conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
It reproduces and so on. But anyway, so let's get rolling on this. We got part 2 of Prejudice.
This is the main event.
So let's move on. Let's talk about homophobia and transphobia then.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a dislike or prejudice against the homosexual people or people who are transgender. Yeah. So this obviously happens. And primarily, obviously, we see this within heterosexual and homosexual, right? We see that happening. So I guess a question: Can the LGBTQ community can they be prejudiced towards heterosexuals?
They're human. Okay. Humans are prejudiced. So the answer obviously is yes.
Okay.
And if and when that happens, then we address that.
Okay, great.
So the thing is that, especially with homophobia and transphobia, they kind of go together. They're related. They're related to, to roles people play in society and so forth. And, why? So you obviously it's a touchy subject with you, and that's fine. And I don't think that's unexpected, and I understand why you would seem that way. Why do you think that people say those kind of things to you? Why do you think people, if they don't accuse you directly, will accuse? So you feel defensive about people talking about Christianity, okay? Christianity as having homophobic or transphobic messages in the Bible, for example. And I have some Bible verses here, but we're not going to bring them up today. And
sorry, Scott.
No, that's fine.
I still love you, Scott.
That's fine. That's fine. But there's think about how you just reacted. Think about how you just reacted to people that don't really know you. If you're talking about online interactions, people don't know you. They just see that you're a Christian, and they form a stereotype, right? That's what we're talking about here. You feel prejudiced against. Would that be accurate to say?
That is not only accurate, but very appropriate given our topic. Yes.
Okay. So what's happening is that Christianity is part of your identity. And if people are talking about it in a way that you feel is unfair, right, or not considering you as a human individual, then you react defensively, and that's to be expected, right? So now think of how that translates into, and I'm not going to say you, but let's say a Christian refusing to call a transgender woman by her. Okay. Now this is a person, they have something core to their identity. And whether or not this other person is addressing them as an individual, or whether or not they're stereotyping or whatever, they're not taking their identity into consideration. They're not taking something that's important to them, that's part of what they identify with, and they're disregarding it. And very often, not all the time, maybe not even most of the time, but often it's done in a malicious way. Not only do you point at the trans. I said you. I didn't mean you personally.
I know what you meant. I know, man. I must have really been like super pit bull rabid for you to be really like you're tiptoeing here. I appreciate that.
neither of us have been ideal discussion partners today, and that's fine. We can move on. We're still talking, and so that's what's important, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But very often you'll see somebody pointing at somebody and calling that person him as a way of saying, no, this is what you are. You don't get to say what you are. I am saying that you are a him. That's what I'm calling you. Okay. So think about how you just felt. You've reacted to, you consider Christianity to be part of your identity, part of you, part of what's important, part of what makes you the way you are, what makes you the human being that you are. And when somebody attacks that, even if it's directly to you, if it's indirectly talking about, the religion and so on, you react to that. What if, how do you think that transgender woman feels when somebody's pointing at them, calling them a him, saying not only are they calling them him, but they're saying you have to call them a him?
Yeah. Do
you see a difference there?
Listen, my heart goes out to them. I don't think we should treat anybody with disrespect. I think that for instance, someone like me, if I'm having a conversation with somebody who is, I'm going to be careful. Well, I'm going to try to be careful what I say. Even if I'm talking to somebody who's a biological male, who is experiencing gender dysphoria or whatever, however far along the process they are.
Are you talking about a person with a penis? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Who wants to be called Sally? Okay. In a conversation with them, I will honor that because I want to be respectful and kind. My only issue with that idea, and this was probably for a whole nother podcast as well.
Yeah, I know. We have something similar in the plans, right? We do for sure. My only issue, again, I think we should be kind and loving, and I will go out of my way to be respectful and kind. My only issue is when we have John in the powerlifting competition in the women's division, because he's Jenny now, but he has all the same, still have are very similar, masculine qualities. It makes it so the women in that category can't compete fairly. So those are only my only qualifying issues with the transgender movement. That's your only issue is fairness in sports? Really? That's your only issue?
Well, fairness is so for instance, if I'm going for a job, let's say, and it has to do with, I don't know why it would be, but let's just say it has to do with sex, and Sarah decides she's going to be John today so she could get the job. Like, those are the kind of issues.
So you're talking about somebody pretending to be transgender.
Right, or having an unfair advantage because of...
So that's different. So that would not... Right. So the person you're describing is not a transgender person. They're a liar.
There are some... Well, that's true. So my issue with the whole bathroom business, my issue isn't with people who have had surgery who are now a female or a female using the female bathroom. That's not my issue. My issue is with John, the pedophile, who decides to use that as a ruse and say, hey, my name's not John now, it's Jenny, and I'm going to get in there so they can have a little peek at my daughter or my wife. That's why I'm in favor of places like big shopping centers and things like that, having family restrooms and having other facilities that are individual. So if people want their privacy, they can have that. I want to accommodate as many people as possible.
So you're saying it's not transgender people wanting to use the appropriate bathroom. What you the problem you have is people who are not transgender pretending to be trans, but they can already do that. They can already make themselves look like something different.
Right.
and do
so
it has nothing to do with transgender.
Well, from what I understand, okay, so if there's a dude who's in makeup, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. Please, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to explain myself the best that I can. I'm not being disrespectful. But if there is a guy, what you would qualify as a liar, who is a man, and he wants to get into the female restroom, and I'm loitering, so to speak, outside the female restroom, waiting for my wife and my daughter, and I see John, 6'3" John, with a wig and makeup, heading into the bathroom, there's at one point in time where I could stop him and say, "Hey, dude, no."
So what do you think has to happen here? Do you think somebody has to show you their genitals?
No, I would not want that. I would, but my question is how do we prevent that? How can we accommodate the transgender folks? And I don't mean straight up transgender, because like if you've truly gone through the surgery and have had the hormones or the testosterone, whichever way you went,
that's not part of the deal. That's just something that they can do. That's just something anybody can do. Okay. Well, we should save the bulk of this discussion. We're going to have a whole episode on this. And so love the sinner, hate the sin. What is your take on that? What is your take on that?
So, like exactly what it says. So like, well, let me ask you, what do you think it means?
I think it means that, and again, here, when I say you, I'm not talking about you personally.
I know. Yeah, I know.
So if somebody were to say to me, "Oh, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin," what they're saying is they see the person doing something that's bad, right? It's like a tough love kind of thing, right? It's I don't want you to do this bad thing. And so when I tell you to stop it, or if I try to legislate you to not able to do it, or, this kind of thing, it's for your own good kind of thing. I'm doing it because I care for you, and I don't want you to do this destructive thing. I think that's what the message is intended to be. And I think very often is the case that the intention that the person actually feels. Mm-hmm. Do you think I'm off base on there, or what?
Slightly. But also too, I mean, a lot of that's right. I mean, we see this all the time with parents, right? As a parent, you and I are both parents, and there's obviously behaviors and things that our children do that we don't approve of. And obviously now we have something to say about it because they're minors, right? So we have a little more say in what they do, but obviously once they turn 18, right, they can do whatever they want, and they could tell us to pound salt. So what we mean by love the sinner, hate the sin, to me has never had any kind of law restrictions or I'm going to force you to do something. It's always been in the context of there are certain behaviors that people do that we don't agree with. But we're not going to see that as who they are. We're going to see them as made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. We're going to love them as a person made in the image of God. And even though we might disagree with them, or not, while we might disagree with a behavior, we still love them. We still want to show love to them. And so love the sinner, hate the sin is just trying to draw a distinction, saying, hey, listen, I don't hate you. I don't, I might not like something you do, but it doesn't mean that I hate you. And so that's the distinction that, at least for me, is that we're trying to make here. That we all do this. There are all things that other people do that we don't like or we don't agree with, but that doesn't mean we can't love them as a person, as an individual. Okay. That's all. And so it has nothing to do with legislating anything over anybody. Like, other people might use it for that. That's just not the context in which I've understood that or I've practiced that, is that we want to love We want to love people even when they do stuff that we disagree with.
Well, I got two points that I want to bring up about that. One is that looking back to many lengthy conversations we've had about morality, one of the things, and I didn't agree with this, but one of the things that you commented about being related to morality has to do with enforcing and enforceability.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that seems to be at odds with what you just said.
No,
how do you mesh those two?
Not necessarily, because there's some behaviors that we might classify as moral or immoral, but that we can't necessarily legislate. And that, you know, my kid,
but you want to.
No, not necessarily. I mean,
take abortion, for example.
I can't make everybody hold to Christian values. If you're not a Christian, why would you hold to Christian values? I can't force you to hold.
But I wasn't talking necessarily about Christian values. You said that it was necessary part of a morality of an objective basis for morality was the ability and the willingness to enforce it.
The enforcement, yes. Mm-hmm.
But that's different than what you just said.
No, the difference is that I mean it's totally different, because there are certain things that we might not find pleasing, but that I have no ability to legislate. So people, listen, do I think adultery is good? No, I think it's morally not good. Mm-hmm. But that's not something I can legislate. Nor can I force people to not cheat on their spouse. I can't do that. Although, if I had a friend, say, who was sleeping around, but you do
think it's immoral. You do think it's immoral.
Yeah,
even though it's not something that can be enforced.
Yeah, it can't be enforced ultimately by me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, not by me. Right, correct.
Well, by anybody, really.
Well, it could by God.
But it's not.
True.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's
that's not part of morality then.
Well,
you think it's immoral, but even though it's not enforced and or can't be enforced.
No, I think what we're talking about here is ultimate enforcement. When I mean enforcement, I didn't mean that I would be able to enforce it, or that I'm talking the standard. That standard could be enforced. But again, we're talking about all kinds of other things that would be incorporated in that, free will and all kinds of other things. So that's morality part 5, buddy.
That's kind of that's a rabbit hole, and I'll own that one. My second point, I said I had 2 points. The second point is though, so how would you feel? Because there are people that feel that indoctrination of children. That would even say flat out Christianity is harmful. And so, what if they wanted to take your kids away because you're doing something harmful to the kids? I dare say that you would be against that.
Right. So didn't I say that there were certain things that but if they say can't be enforced, that they disagree with?
Right, but if somebody was raping their child, I think, I think that I was going to qualify it, but that would almost sound more insulting than not qualifying it. You would want to take that person's kids away.
Right.
Okay. And so whether or not you are personally able to, or whether or not, you can, you would be in favor of doing that.
Yes.
Right. So now consider the same situation. Somebody sees you doing something that they see as harmful to your children. How would you feel about them trying to take your kids away, or trying to encourage people to take your kids away, or telling you we're going to take your kids away and stuff like that?
So what I'm trying to figure out is how this relates to love the sinner, hate the sinner. Are you tying it in with that?
Yeah. What I'm saying is, what if you were on the receiving end of somebody saying, I don't hate you, I love you. That's why I don't want you to be hurting your children this way.
Listen, I was in that position. I was a drug addict for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I had all kinds of people who hated what I did, who went out of their way to try to prevent me from doing what I was doing.
How'd you feel at the time?
But they still loved me.
How did you feel at the time?
Oh, I knew what I was doing was wrong. I didn't care. That's what drugs do.
So you agree. So you understood and you agreed that the thing that they were saying was wrong. You agreed with them that it was wrong. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about where one person thinks the other person is doing something wrong, and they want to stop, or they want to encourage them, or anything along the spectrum of possible reactions. I want to encourage you to stop it. I want to talk to you against doing it, all the way up to the most extreme. I want to imprison you, or take your kids away from you, or execute you, or that kind. So there's a wide variety of possibilities. But think about it from that perspective. Somebody thinks that you're doing something wrong that you don't think is wrong. In fact, that you consider to be
you'd have to
something
ask
you consider
what we're
core
talking
to
about.
your ability.
Okay, so listen, we have to figure out. So, are you trying to make the analogy or trying to make the correlation between, say, somebody thinking that it's horrible that I'm teaching my kids Christianity, that's indoctrination, that's child abuse, I want to take your kids, and some Christian thinks that homosexuality is wrong and we should stop them from that behavior.
Right. We want to vote so that they can't get married. We want to prevent them from adopting children. We want to. Okay. So
so there are
those
certain
kind of things.
Well, we'd have to ask ourselves, what kind of behaviors are we talking about? For instance, there are all certain laws that discriminate against people all the time. We could only go 35 down my street. I can't go 36 miles. Technically, legally, I can't go 30. I have to go 35. That law is discriminating against other things. There's all kinds of laws
I don't see
that
how that's discriminating.
Well,
speed limit is discriminating.
Yeah. Well, we're telling people what they can do, what they can and cannot do.
Right, but it's still the same for everybody.
You can't purchase alcohol till you're 21. You can't go above the speed limit. Things like that.
I think you're missing my point here. You're missing we were talking about loving the sinner and hating the sin. You made it clear that there was a difference between the two.
Yes.
Okay. And so, but you take it very personally when somebody does the same to you.
Okay.
Right. I'm not saying
in what way.
Well, you've reacted very strongly. You take it very personally if somebody attacks Christianity, and that's because Christianity definitely is part of what you. So what I'm saying is that think about it from the perspective of somebody else. Okay, if you say I love the sinner, I hate the sin, your actions are still against that person's something that's vitally important to them, something that's their identity. Okay, if you go to a ballot place and you vote against gay marriage, okay, then what you're doing is you're saying with your vote that they shouldn't be able to do that, right? And so then you're saying, well, we want to, I still love you, I just want to take away this right from you.
Well,
because I think it's wrong that you should have it.
Well, that's a whole nother topic. You're claiming something is a right. You're automatically assuming that that's a right. And that's, like I said, that's for a whole different topic. Listen, I had no problem with homosexuals being, I just don't want to be involved in the religious ceremony. Mm-hmm. Just don't force me to be involved in their religious ceremony.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is doing that.
They are. They're forcing bakers.
Anybody suspect.
They're forcing bakers to bake cakes for their wedding. They're forcing photographers to go to their wedding.
That's something different. No.
How they're forcing people to go against their religious convictions, right? Where they could get that product somewhere else, but they're saying, no, you have to come.
See, the
and
difference
affirm
is
my beliefs. You have to come. Go ahead.
No, it doesn't have anything to do with affirming your beliefs. Okay, selling somebody a cake is not affirming their beliefs. If you'll sell the exact same cake to one couple, but not to another couple, then the distinguishing factor between that's deciding you is the couple.
Is the religious ceremony, is the type of ceremony.
When you're doing a ceremony, you're saying things, you're expressing things. Okay, that's different than making a cake. It's not like you have to make the cake say gay people are the best and Christians suck. Okay,
so
it's not like that. I would support not making a baker put that kind of thing on a cake. But if it's the identical wedding cake and the only difference is this couple I don't agree with, I don't approve of their wedding, and this couple I do, then that's discrimination. That's prejudice. That's not, that has nothing to do with the cake. It has nothing, once somebody buys something, it's theirs, right? It's not, you're not supporting their decisions or anything. You're providing a service. And
this is probably a whole new episode. This is definitely a rabbit trail because this is definitely a whole episode that's involved in this. So, I mean, it is. I'm not trying to skirt this stuff. I'm just trying to stop us because it'll be 3 a.m. before we're done.
I'm laughing because I'm looking at our outline here and we're about halfway through.
Maybe we should break this up into 2. What do you think?
Well, I think let's just kind of let's touch on the rest of these points. I think we can push through this. So so we're gonna address the whole homophobia, transphobia thing a little later. Right. So nationalism, right? So go ahead. What's nationalism?
So technically, it's identification with one's own nation and support for its interest, especially to the exclusion or detriment of interest of other nations. So oftentimes we see this played out like the USA against Middle Eastern countries or something of that nature, or USA and Mexico or something like that. So we often see people who take pride in but see, I think this is a little different because when you talk about to the exclusion or the detriment of the interest of other nations, I guess my question would be, don't we all do that? Shouldn't all countries kind of look out for number one first and then help other people? I mean, I hear it all the time, like, hey, we're fighting all these wars. Why can't we stop fighting these wars over there and then spend more money on our veterans, on our people? And so I guess I don't know if I would consider that nationalism, but I don't know. What would you, what do you think about this whole idea of nationalism or support of one's own country? Yeah.
I mean, nationalism in some cases is used synonymously with patriotism. Okay. And patriotism is one thing. And whether or not George Carlin had this famous bit about patriotism. He was like, how can you be proud of something that was just totally a random chance? You have it's not like you accomplished being Irish, that kind of thing. But that's a side issue. I'm not against patriotism. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm happy to make do what I can to make the country a good place. But there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism, and I didn't know this, but I did a little bit of research, and I found this on the Merriam-Webster page, and it was a little side bit about nationalism, and they had an article about it, and here's one paragraph out of it. It says, these two words may have shared a distinct sense in the 19th century, but appear to have grown apart since. Or rather, it would be more accurate to say that nationalism has grown apart. So what they were saying is they shared kind of the same gist, back in the 19th century, but languages evolve and change as they do. But And so they've been growing apart. And so nationalism has kind of, let me see, where did I leave off here? There are still obvious areas of overlap. We define patriotism as, quote, love for or devotion for one's country, and nationalism in part as loyalty and devotion to a nation. But the definition of nationalism also includes exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests as opposed to those of other nations or supranational groups. And so, in other words, like you said, watching out for number one is part of it, but it's also promoting, not necessarily promoting, but more of like in an imperial kind of sense. Do you know what I mean when I say that? It's like, spreading one's culture, like we want to make the world be like us kind of thing. And that's not necessarily what a nationalist is thinking, but that's kind of the flavor of that, we're better than you kind of thing. It's not just, we're going to trade with you because we got kids to feed kind of thing. It's like, this is the way things have to be, or taking priority over, NATO or UN, organizations where there's a bunch of countries working together. And nationalism as a word, it can go a bunch of different ways. There's clearly some flavors of the word that include things like racism and xenophobia and that kind of stuff. Not all of them do, but very often it does. And recently in the United States, it's kind of been tied to like white nationalism and that kind of thing. And the idea of, things were so much good when we were all white people, but now, white America is becoming a minority. We're on the verge of being a minority in the United States. And that frightens some people, not everybody, and not just, Jamie and his family. Okay. Right. It's there's people all over the place that are nervous, and, things change and change can be frightening. But I don't know. It was interesting to me to see that, there was a time when these two words, patriotism and nationalism, were used synonymously. And in some ways now they're opposites. They're antonyms now. They're, one might say, if you believe in an America that's e pluribus unum, right? So that's our original, national motto. That means one thing. That the melting pot, right? It was people coming from other countries, and we're making a better life for ourselves. But now, the idea is, okay, we want to put up walls. We don't want to be infected by these other groups and that kind of thing. And again, not all. I'm not trying to paint everybody with that brush. There's certainly a million different shades of gray. As much as there is for individuals. But I just thought that was an interesting kind of twist on that, and almost ironic.
Yeah, it is, and I could see how. And man, I think recently too, like Webster has got to be rolling over in his grave. Just all the changes, all the words, the new words, the changes in words, and just to see, even in my lifetime, how in 41 years, how words have changed and certain meanings have taken on different connotations and different things like that. I've always thought of nationalism. I've never saw it as a bad thing, because I always saw it as patriotism on steroids. Like, hey, I think our country's the best. Not in terms of, hey, only American lives matter, but in terms of like just proud that we live in America, that we have a free society, that we want to eradicate prejudice, and that we want to do these things, and that we're championing the causes of all these other things. And it's just kind of a pride thing, or hey, the world's got problems, but we should do our best to mind to our own problems first. So I saw that kind of as being nationalism, not so much some of those negative connotations and some of those things that you were talking about, to the detriment of other countries. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't see this as a huge problem, though, not compared to some of the other ones on our list, at least not currently. So let's move on to religious prejudice. This is just a dislike or prejudice against people from other religions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to atheists in America.
well, obviously, there's religions are formed from religious individuals, right? And so human beings have prejudice, and that's something that's a thread that's been coming up over and over and over again in each of these different sections. And so we shouldn't be surprised that there's warring and fighting and unspeakable things happening in the name of religion. Pretty much any religion you can find is going to have, overzealous, violent people in it. And most religions will have some people that are just the coolest people you've ever known. I mean, it's some of my favorite people ever are Christians. And some, and I lived in West Africa when I was in the Peace Corps. I lived with a Muslim family. Everybody around me was Muslim. And so, there was some, a quick story here. I know we're going into the marathon, episode here today. Just a quick story of just the coolest thing. One of the coolest things that happened to me when I was in the Peace Corps. And there was a night that, I was having some kind of, it turned out to be, it was like an anxiety attack. It was just, you're there, you're kind of isolated. I was in the middle of a bunch of people that I didn't know. And that's really the main thing that these volunteers deal with is the isolation. And so I was having what turned out to be an anxiety attack, but I was having chest pains and so on. And so I was able to get to a phone and call the Peace Corps office, and they were going to come pick me up, and they were going to, have me checked out. But while I was waiting for them to come pick me up, the father of the compound that I was living in, he and I could communicate. He could speak a little bit of English, and I could speak a little bit of the local languages. But I was part of his family. I was part of his family. He sat out with me, waiting for the car with a bow and arrow. I'm serious. He sat there with a bow and arrow, and he told me he was protecting me from bandits.
Wow.
And I just thought this is the most surreal moment of my life. And it was. I was sitting there with this, 60-year-old African man with a bow and arrow, and it was just it was touching, and it was crazy, and it was, and I was worried that I was going to have a heart attack, and they didn't, and it was just the weirdest thing, maybe even the weirdest moment of my life. But anyway, so what did I totally distract us from here?
No, that was a cool story. About? We were talking about
religious prejudice.
Yeah, right,
okay, yeah. So his family was Muslim, and so so part of their faith was that they had a strong, they welcomed me into the family and as one of them, even though I was from someplace else. And so, that's part of the frustrating thing is this, watch out for me first, right? Didn't Jesus say, if somebody tries to steal your jacket, give them your cloak too, or something along those lines? Is that, I don't mean to spring a surprise Bible verse on you here.
I didn't mean to make you itchy trigger finger there. I'm sorry if I had a trigger finger earlier.
But wasn't that a message there? If somebody...
part of it is turn the other cheek and
didn't he hang out with the beggars and the lepers and the outcasts? And wasn't that part of the thing? Wasn't that part of his whole idiom there?
Yeah, and a lot of women too. Yeah, that part of it was that.
So how does that mesh with that nationalism idea?
I don't mean like look out for number one, like to the detriment of other people. And I don't mean look out for number one in terms of we shouldn't help anybody else. I mean, my church is a huge supporter in world missions. And I know that a lot of people tie in like missionaries with, proselytizing and just spreading the gospel. But man, the missionaries that I know and that we support, they're the kind that are building schools and hospitals. And I mean, it's part of their assimilating into these other cultures. And so like, I'm all for, sacrifice and sacrificing of myself for other people and things like that. I think that that's something that Jesus would definitely promote. And I'm not saying that I am for nationalism in the bad sense. Just when I say look out for number one, I'm just thinking that and I wasn't even necessarily saying it for myself, but a lot of people just see that as like there's a lot of people that are in need right here. And that we should maybe help those people first before we help other people. And I didn't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I'm not saying that I even advocate that. I don't know. I think there's probably a balance of helping your own people with helping other people in other places. And that's what we do in my home. That's what we do in my church. We do a lot of outreaches in the city of Columbus, but we're also sending, money all over the world for all kinds of other things to help other people. So I didn't mean nationalism in terms of look out for number one as a selfish kind of thing. And more as just, hey, wouldn't it make more sense to, take care of, the people in our own backyard kind of thing? That there's a lot of people that see that as nationalism. And like I said, I didn't mean it in terms of like, we need to be selfish kind of thing. But because I think we could sacrifice for people here at home too. Like we have a lot of veterans that are struggling with certain things that could sure use some help. And so I think that would be a good thing. And that it doesn't mean that we aren't sacrificing. It just means we're sacrificing here rather than, but I'm not even for that. I'm not even for that. Like I'm for also helping, aiding other countries, being involved in other countries and things like that, but not just for the sake of the other countries, but also I think too, that ultimately that helps us as well. And that's not a bad thing. So not talking about you in specific, but do you see how that could be seen as a mixed message? That Jesus said that we should love other people, but we should take care of our own? No, it was more
than just we should love other people. He said, at least the way that I read it, is that you should give to help other people first before yourself. You should give them if they try to steal your jacket, you give them also you say keep it, and then you give them your cloak too. It's like, it's giving you of caring for the other people first before, and then for yourself.
Right, to a certain extent, but there's also places in the Bible where it talks about if the person, like for me, my home. If my home is in chaos, that I shouldn't be out helping and doing for all kinds of other people if I'm not doing for my wife and my children first. You know what I'm saying? So there's other verses in the Bible that talk about. So I see your point. It's a legitimate point that as Christians we're called to live self-sacrificial lifestyles, and that the whole nationalism could be seen as some kind of meshing, or not meshing, but some kind of contradictory or clashing, two kind of thoughts clashing. But again, I'm not necessarily talking about the selfish kind of, hey, let's just me, you, and no more. How's that go? How's that? Me, you, and a few, or something like that, or you, me, and no more. Or
I have no idea what you're talking about.
There's some kind of fancy saying that is just basically like you and me and no more kind of thing. And that's not what I advocate. That's not what I think. But I can't see how people would maybe see that. But I think that they probably shouldn't stereotype. Maybe they should ask some questions.
That's a great idea. Hi, this is Scott busting into the conversation here. I just need to do a quick little explanation of what Jamie and I are about to talk about. It was just a thing that happened on social media. I had responded to a friend's post, and she had on her post, there was a picture of a bunch of pieces of toast, and she said something along the lines of, this is what science nerds do when they get a new toaster. And so then my question to her was, what was their conclusion? And she said, don't you mean what was your conclusion? And then I realized, you mean you were one of the science nerds. And so the idea was that there was some kind of implied sexism in my comment. And so after a brief couple of comments between the two of us, I paused for a second and I thought about it, and I was like, I wonder if I was being sexist there. And so, and then Jamie and I talk about it here.
There was only that one about your experience. You don't remember that?
I don't remember. You said a science. What I don't remember. What you
the Cliff Notes version was this. Obviously, you could, if you want to edit all this out, you can. So you were I think you were on Facebook and you saw a lady who posted some kind of project, and you kind of assumed that it was her son's, and you mentioned, what was his conclusion? And then she jumped on you about, what, you don't think I could do it? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then that didn't even bother me. The fact that she did that, I get that. That's happening all the time. That drives me crazy, but not as much as your reaction. Your reaction was, maybe I was. And I'm like, no, you weren't. You thought it was her son's. Like, of all people, Scott, you of all people, like, you were the most.
No,
like,
like
at least in the moment, you were expressing to me this thought of, like, maybe I was, and I'm like, no, are you out of your mind? I could see somebody accusing me of this, but not you.
No, like, I'm not. I'm saying I didn't come to the conclusion that I was, but just because I paused and wanted to check myself, to me, that was the important thing. And I think
I just thought that was.
Well, even if it's true that it's ridiculous that I would ever think that, I still think it's important to stop and check and say, wait a minute, am I really doing that? And then I came to the decision that I don't think I was.
Well, like, self-reflection is good. Like, as a Christian, man, I'm always self-reflecting. Like, where am I wrong? What, how can I be more like Jesus? All that kind of stuff. But like, you knew your intentions right off the bat. You thought her kid did it, and so you had
I thought that her daughter did it.
Yeah, that's it. And so, you had absolutely no, it was like the intent. Like, your intent was not even 100%. It was 1,000% innocent and just curious. And but it just kind of shows how far we've come, that, like, we have this, like, instinctive, like, I'm going to throw myself in the fetal position because I may have looked at somebody wrong. I'm like, I've got a crooked eye. I look at everybody wrong. But right.
You use that all the time, don't you?
I
bet you
do.
use that. Okay. But here was my point, though. My point was that she was seeing it from a different perspective. She wasn't looking inside. Yeah, she was a casual friend. I mean, we're not like close friends or anything, but we were in Peace Corps together, so we knew each other from there. And so, she and we've been interacting online, periodically, since, for the last few years. So she knew enough of me to know that it probably, that I think when she sat down and thought about it, she didn't realize. Or she thought that probably wasn't the case, but that was her perspective. I mean, that was
her.
But that's the kind of thing that she gets all day.
But her first thought was,
right,
it's got to be sexist. Like, man, like, I don't know.
No.
To me, that just seemed like I don't know. It just seemed like that was her first reaction. Like, I don't. Maybe I wasn't.
your first reaction is your conditioned reaction. And this is actually something further down on the line. So maybe we could jump ahead to this.
Yeah, because she didn't have to respond to that, though.
Your first reaction is a conditioned response. Okay. That's, I think, in one of our past episodes, I recommended the book Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow.
Yeah.
Okay. And by Daniel Kahneman. And so that's what he was talking about. We have our fast knee-jerk reactions. And that's, part of our brain does that fast thinking. And that's where a lot of these prejudices and stereotypes come from, is this fast, thoughtless, irrational, knee-jerk reaction kind of thing. And that's your first reaction. But then when you sit down and think about it, that's your reasonable and your rational self coming in. So when I said that to her, it was not a rational response, or at least I don't think it was. And her first reaction was, why couldn't I be, why couldn't I be the one who was interested in the science? And it turned out it was her, and I think her husband, or her and a friend of hers, who were talking about this science, something they did. I can't remember exactly what it was now. Shoot, I wish I would have researched that a little bit. But anyway, but yeah, so her first reaction was, well, why couldn't it be me? I'm a woman. What's the problem with that? And yeah, she said that. It was either in that same comment or in a subsequent comment where she said, well, but I know you, now that I think about it, I don't think that your reaction is that way, but I don't begrudge her for saying that. I mean, that show to me, I view that as not her accusing me of anything. For one thing, I don't think she was. I don't think she was accusing anything. I don't think she was accusing me of anything. But even if she was, I'm in the position where I don't really have to care if she's going to accuse me of anything.
Well,
but that's not what I. But I don't think she was.
It sounded, when you first mentioned it, it sounded like she. It wasn't as accusatory. Well, kind of. It almost sounded like it was when you initially had mentioned it. But my thing is. But that was her conditioned response. I get that. That's the scary thing. Is that was her first conditioned response? Is that it had to be? But it's not. It's not some kind of discrimination or something.
It's not conditioned because people keep telling her that girls don't do this. It's because people don't expect her to do those kind of things. It's not. It's a conditioned response. It's not conditioned by somebody that sat down and talked to her and taught her this thing. That's the kind of world she lives in. That's the way she's treated. That's the conditioning there. Is that she in her world, people don't expect that from her, often enough for her to respond differently. And my first reaction was kind of defensive. And again, that's my conditioned response. If she's going to say that, is she accusing me of being sexist? And at first I thought I almost sat down and responded and say, what are you talking about? You know me better than that. You don't need to say that kind of thing to me. But then I checked myself that's her experience. And she later said, like I said, either later in that comment or in a later comment, she said, yeah, I didn't think that was you, but I can't begrudge her of her experience. She's just sharing with me something of her life. And so that,
I guess my question is how much of that experience is legitimate and how much of that experience is just,
it's 100% legitimate. It just depends on what you think it's saying.
Whoa. What I meant by that is,
no, I wasn't saying that you were. Is
that she's had all these experiences that she has interpreted as being sexist or whatever. How many of those really were, and how many did she just interpret as that being the case? And I'm not taking away from that. I'm not taking any experience away from her. I'm just saying we've gotten to the point now, I think, in our society where everything that is put out there, people automatically interpret it in the worst possible sense, in the worst possible way. And so they could say, well, I've been discriminated against all the time. Well, in a lot of these instances, you can go back and go, that wasn't discrimination at all. It was just perceived or whatever. And that's not taking away from any real discrimination. I'm going to make it be really clear. I don't want to take away from anybody's legitimate and even perceived. Like I get it. Like I get it and I don't get it. Right. So like I understand, but I don't necessarily know if I can empathize because I'm a white male. And I mean, and I don't mean that, and I'm not being derogatory. I'm being legitimate. I do realize that I don't face discrimination like other people do. Or prejudice and things like that. I get that. I understand that.
Well, let me sum it up this way. And it was an interesting back and forth. And I actually learned something about myself from it, and it was interesting for me to. I don't know. I just found it interesting, but it was I at the end of the day, I viewed it as I just got a peek of somebody else's life, a tiny little peek of what it's like to be that other person that I normally wouldn't get, and so I appreciated that, and I asked her if she if I could share the story on the podcast. What I think we should do here is let's just. I just want to do a brief bit about what does the existence of prejudice say about your worldview?
Yeah.
Do you mind if we just jump straight to the last thing? And
sounds
then
good to me.
Okay.
Yep.
Then, so what I wanted to ask you is, so we've been talking about prejudice and stereotypes and all this kind of stuff, and clearly, from both of our reactions to much of what has happened, it's something that stabs to the core of us as an individuals and us as groups within society and as a society as a whole. And so, how do you think about how does this fit into a Christian perspective on the world, like the existence of this thing called prejudice?
Right. Well, it fits nicely in this way that as a Christian, I believe that we all have a proclivity to do what's wrong. We just, don't have to teach a kid how to be selfish, like we all have a proclivity to do those things that are wrong. And I mentioned, I think one other time, maybe if you had a giant flat screen projection TV above your head that it was hooked up to your brain and portrayed every image, everything that you thought in HD quality image, would you ever leave your home? And everybody's like, no, because I think it just shows our sin nature and just our proclivity to kind of do those things that maybe we ought not to. And so I think as Christians, the idea of prejudice is that I think a case could be made, and I haven't made it yet, but I think I could, that God loves all people, that we are all made in the image of God, and that we should treat people with as much respect and as much kindness as we can, and we shouldn't be prejudiced at all. But just the fact that we are prejudiced, I think, speaks to us and our proclivity to sin.
Interesting. So you think this was intentional that we'd be like this?
No, I think that any time that you have free moral agents will have freedom of the will. And we have, if we have the ability to love, then we have to have that ability for free choice, and we're naturally going to find ourselves doing things we ought not, because that we have those choices and we're capable of making them. Yeah,
that's interesting. I think
What do you think about naturalism?
Well, I was going to say, I think we have a seed for exploring the whole free will issue and sin and all that stuff. And so we'll have to make a note of maybe doing an episode on that. As far as my perspective on prejudice, it's totally expected behavior. You've mentioned before that we are, hyperactive pattern spotters, right? And so if we think about it in terms of if we think of it in terms of evolutionary history, for the vast majority of human evolutionary history, we lived in small clans, right? So small groups of family groups, basically. And so for most of the early humans and proto-humans and, early hominids and so forth, for most of their lifetimes, everybody that they would ever see was in their family.
Yeah.
Only on rare occasions would they encounter other groups, and in those cases, when they did encounter other groups, they were the enemy, right? Because there was a competition for resources, and we didn't have the lavish lifestyles that we do now. It was a day-to-day thing. If they kill you, then your family dies, right? And if you kill them, then you have more. And so it makes sense, so people that you see every day, you protect, you identify with, it makes for a tighter knit group. If there's that prejudice there, and if there's somebody that you don't recognize or you don't see, maybe they look different, maybe they sound different, maybe they smell different. There's all these different kinds of differences. And so we would expect that. And so it's also a property of evolution, or just a happenstance, a quirk of evolution, is that we have a tendency to overreact. In fact, selection pressure rewards people who overreact, because if you're going to make an error, it's better to, the better safe than sorry kind of situation. Right. Yeah. And so it'll fade, because we're going to make mistakes one way or the other. And so if we're already erring in one direction, then even if we make a slight mistake in the other direction, we're still okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to me, it seems like an inevitable product of selective pressure and of natural selection. So I don't know. Do you have any last words on this?
Ooh, well, you know what? Prejudice is a real thing. Obviously, from this podcast, our listeners will be able to tell that it is something that is both for you and I of a topic of interest, and for me, I'm dealing with these things every day. Not that I'm being discriminated against, but I guess both you and I both deal with this all the time too, because we're discussing with other people and we're talking to other people. And so, there's some I guess just some real emotion wrapped up into this, because like you mentioned earlier, it has a lot to do with our identity, who we are, who we see other people are. And, so I think this was a good discussion, even though it went long. I think that we righted the ship for whatever that's worth.
Well, I think this would be a good place to wrap this up. I'm sure these topics will come up again. And
yes, they will.
And that does it for Prejudice. There we go.
In the books.
All right, so that was the second half of the Prejudice, right? Part 2 of the Prejudice talk, and I think like we said before, when we were coming into the discussion, how I think this will spark other conversations, and so we certainly want to welcome anybody listening. If you have any kind of commentary you'd like to add, and please let us know at email at godornotpodcast.com, and we'd love to hear other opinions. We like talking to each other, but we also like to hear other people too.
Yes.
And so we do want to invite further conversation. And so I think what we'll do now, and this would be kind of a palate cleanser for now, and that is a light little thing that we like to call Spin the Wheel. So here we go with Spin the Wheel.
Spin that wheel.
Okay, so we're spinning the wheel here, and this is one of our fun bits. I think we cover a wide swath of topics, and the thing about this is we don't know what the other person is going to ask us, and so it's all off the cuff, and it's all ready to roll. So let's spin the wheel and see what Jamie's going to be talking about tonight.
Something I know. Come on, something I know.
All right, Jamie, your topic today is the American Constitution.
Oh.
The American Constitution. So the question I have for you is, I imagine that you're familiar with the First Amendment that guarantees the freedom of religion. So, and I want to hear your opinion on the separation of church and state. And so basically what I'm asking is, do you feel like it has a place in the United States? Do you feel it's important to the core values of the United States? And specifically, I would like to hear basically two answers from you. One as an American and one as a Christian. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you would place your Christianity having priority over your status as an American. And so to kind of take all that in mind, I'm not trying to push you in one particular direction. I really just want to get an idea of your thoughts on this. And so let's start the timer.
Okay, here we go. Such a big topic. Separation of church and state. I think that what our founding fathers were interested in was not necessarily, hey, we have to keep religion out of everything. It was, hey, we just left a place that told us what religion we had to practice, and we don't want that. And so I think that their ideas were more or less not that we couldn't have religion in the state, but that we would keep the state out of religion, that the state couldn't mandate. And that's why people will be surprised by this, but I'm against school prayer. I mean, if you're in a Christian school, fine. You're in a Christian school. And if you send your kid to a Christian school, you know they're going to be praying. That's how it works. But if it's a public school, I don't think they should mandate some kind of prayer. If my kid went to a school in a Middle Eastern country and they expected them to get out their rug and pray 5 times towards Mecca, I would not be happy with that. I would not be happy with that. But I think a lot of times what happens is when people say there's a separation of church and state, what they're saying is, hey, you can't have your values influence your decisions. And I think that's hogwash. Everybody's beliefs, everyone's worldview influences their decisions. And a Christian is just the same. I mean, what is core of me is going to influence my decisions. It's going to help the trajectory of where I'm at. So I think separation of church and state is a good thing, but it isn't what it means to a lot of people, which is we can't have any kind of religious connotations in anything. Man, that was a long ticker. Like I thought it was going to be over sooner.
So you only took 1 minute and 57 seconds.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to take that 3 seconds back at some point, I'm sure.
You're going to bank it? You're going to bank that?
That's right, yes.
I think you're still working off of your time debt from past. That's
probably
okay.
That's probably not a good thing,
man.
Then. Yeah,
no, it's all good.
All right.
Okay, well, I think we got lots of. I think that maybe could be the spark of maybe some future talks as well. But so I want to see what you have for me. So let's spin the wheel.
All right, here we go. Okay, Scott, yours landed on, well, I guess a theological category here. My question to you has to do with sin, the concept of sin. So to define sin would be just kind of a moral wrongdoing. My question to you is, how do you feel about sin? How do you feel about feeling guilty? Because you and I both agree objective moral values exist. What do you feel like? Where do you think this idea of guilt comes from? And do you feel a need to confess sin or ask for forgiveness? Like, how does that weigh on you, if at all? If at all.
Okay.
All right. Here we go. Let's hit the timer.
Okay. So first of all, if we can define sin, depending on how you define it, I might not think it's a thing. Like some people would say that sin is disobeying God, right? And obviously, I don't believe there's a God. And so if that's what you mean by sin, then I don't think sin is an actual thing. But you said that we're treating sin as like some kind of moral wrongdoing and that kind of thing. And you mentioned specifically about guilt. And so yeah, obviously I'm a human too. I feel guilty sometimes when I do something bad. I think a lot of that has to do with social pressure. That has to do with the idea that, if you look back into our evolutionary history, we have social responsibilities to each other. And those derive out of the fact that, as social animals, we're more successful if we work together. We're more successful if we have harmony in our family or in our clan. We're more successful if we can set aside issues like that. And so I think, our sense of guilt, I think it stems from that. I think it derives from that. I think in the past, if you had maybe two clans that are kind of competing for the same thing, if one of them had more social harmony because they did things to make amends to each other when they wronged each other, they did things to patch things up. That the whole idea of guilt is that you want to try to fix it, that you want to try to air it out. You want to try to, become a better person as a result of that. And so I think in terms of, the guilty feelings, do I feel the need to confess my sins? I don't know if I'd put it that way. And I'm going to go over time here. I'm going to take your 3 seconds.
Go ahead, Bob.
I don't think, depending on what you mean by do you feel the need to confess, I don't feel like I need to like the Catholic version of confession. I don't need to go to a stranger and tell them my sins and have them give me absolution and penance and that kind of thing. But I have a conscience. And so if I were to do something bad to somebody, I would feel better if I told them about it. And if we were able to make amends, so that the idea is that I don't want to do it again and so on. So I don't know if I hope that ansers at least the bulk of your question there.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty par for the course for a naturalist, that's kind of what I expected you to answer, but of course I wasn't sure. That's why I asked you.
Cool. All right. Well, that's the whole point of spin the wheel. Okay, the wheel has been spun. And now we're ready to move on to our last bit that we're going to do for this episode. And this will be a continuation of our, I guess what we're calling the God or Not Book Club. I suppose the name is kind of stuck for a while now. So we're stuck with it. But in this case, this will be our second installment of the book club. And let's just get rolling on that. So this is the God or Not Book Club.
This is the God or Not
biggest book club meeting in the world.
All right, so here we are with the second installment of the God or Not Book Club.
Book club. I feel like there should be some kind of like some kind of I don't know, some kind of.
Why don't you look into that? Why don't you look into it? We can have a book club theme song or something.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Make sure it's free though. Make sure it's royalty free. So
that's right.
So we've been reading Richard Carrier's book, Sense and Goodness Without God. And so now we're getting a little ways into it. And so we're starting to get into some of the meat. I think, so for this time we read, last time we read chapter 1, which was an introduction, and chapter 2, which was kind of like his personal history and that kind of stuff. And in this one, we're starting to talk about metaphysical naturalism. And So we did the first half of chapter 3. Chapter 3 was kind of a lengthy one, and we've been going, I don't know, about 60-ish pages for each of these little installments. And so he starts out, he talks about, what is a worldview? It encompasses basically, everything, your opinion and your beliefs about various aspects of reality. And he gave a brief description of metaphysical naturalism. And I'll have to admit to you, Jamie, I feel kind of let down a little bit here. At least the way I read it, his presentation or the way he described metaphysical naturalism I thought really matched well with kind of my approach. He wasn't wording it as strongly as I thought he was going to. Basically, he said that we're aware of the natural world, we know things about the natural world, and we don't know about about other things. And so he was saying, this is the most plausible explanation. But he did mention multiple times, that this is basically a working hypothesis kind of thing.
Right.
And so it's not like he was saying that he's not ruling out, or at least that's the impression I got. Maybe as we read further, we might see something different. But it seemed like he wasn't ruling out supernatural.
No, and I think that his history too showed that he would be open to it, unless that's changed. Because in his history, he talked all about his experience and trying to find what he thought was true. So and that included some spiritual aspects to it. So at least up until now, it seems like he'd be open to that possibility. Right.
Yeah. I was not really let down, but one of the reasons that I chose this book is I wanted to give you something to chew on, somebody who was being aggressive and dogmatic and saying, this is the way it is. And turned out to be not quite so bad. Again, there were a few places where just the lack of footnotes was just rubbing me the wrong way. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so he talks a little bit about metaphysical naturalism, and then he goes on, he talks a little bit about the origin of the universe. And I know we've covered some of this stuff in our first episode, as a matter of fact.
Ad nauseum, yes.
Yeah. And so he talked about the plausibility of a God hypothesis. And he, his viewpoint is that, naturalism, we can demonstrate nature, we can demonstrate science and so forth. And he was kind of building his naturalism on top of I think he used a boat analogy, the boat of science. And how supernaturalism kind of goes above and beyond what we can demonstrate. He talked a little bit about the multiverse, which I thought was an interesting, little thing to slip in there. At first, I wasn't really sure why he was bringing that up, but I think what he said at the beginning of this part is that he talked about metaphysical naturalism, and then he said, well, that's basically it. And so from here on out, I'm going to be talking about not metaphysical naturalism in particular, but more so other things about my worldview. And so he's calling it metaphysical naturalism, but that's really just one characteristic of this larger worldview that he's presenting.
You see that often if you hold to a naturalistic or any worldview. Like a lot of times you can assume if you hold a Christian worldview that your beliefs are probably X, Y, and Z. Right. Because that just happens to be the norm. And so with him holding to certain beliefs, a lot of times you'll see that with the naturalist. Okay, that these are, even though that might not necessarily technically be considered part of, naturalism per se, that is kind of included within their worldview.
Right. When I was reading it though, I wouldn't say disappointed, but I was a little bit taken aback because the title of the book is A Defense of Metaphysical, or at least that's a subtitle, A Defense of Metaphysical Naturalism. And so I thought he would be spending more time on that, but that's okay. There's still plenty of interesting things. And I think he's really, I think at the point that we're at the book now, I think we're kind of starting to get the ball rolling. So he goes on to talk a little bit more about other characteristics of the universe, first cause. We've talked about that at length as well. One thing I saw was that he was talking about the origin of order, and he was saying that, order can come from chaos because within, if you look at a string of random numbers, for example, there's going to be a spot in there where you see, the numbers 1 through 50 in order. Mm-hmm. If you have random digits. And so he was saying that, order can come from chaos. And that was most of what he was saying, I felt kind of aligned with my own thinking. This was one spot where I felt a little different. I wouldn't really call that order. I would call that more like happenstance or something along those lines. And for me, the difference between order and chaos is that order is just simpler. Order is simpler. For example, like if I dealt you if I dealt you some cards, right? And if I dealt you the ace, the 2, the 3, the 4, and the 5 of hearts.
Yeah, baby.
Okay.
Woo!
And so if I deal you that, and then on the other hand, I deal you the Jack of Hearts, the King of Diamonds, the 2 of Spades, the 3 of Clubs, and the 7 of Clubs. And I asked you, and I waited a few minutes, and then asked you to tell me what was in those 2 hands.
Yeah.
And so, it's only been 10 seconds ago. Can you tell me what was in the first hand?
Yeah, the first hand's easy because it was a straight. and it was in the same suit.
Exactly. And so, and we, I don't know, maybe you could remember a couple of the cards from the second hand,
right?
Or I don't know if you could remember all of them. I'd be impressed. I've already forgotten them anyway. But anyway, so for me,
listen, Scott, I'm just trying not to breathe into the microphone. Okay, I'm trying to survive here. I'm not going to try to remember anything.
Aim away from the microphone. Okay, so anyway, so that's kind of was the way that I disagreed with him on that, but it was still interesting to hear that. He did talk about time and about the B theory of time or block time, for example, and he compared that to the traditional what I think is more common in the general population. He was saying that the B theory of time is more common among physicists in that area, but I would say that the A theory of time, the idea that time is linear. One moment appears and then it's gone, and then we go on to the next one, kind of thing. That's probably a little bit more common with the general population. But I thought there was an interesting talk about time. But that was one of those spots where I was like, okay, well, what does this have to do? Well, okay, maybe it'll all come together. Maybe it'll all gel. And I maybe you can comment on this as well. The impression that I was getting was that he is part of the book is going to be justifying this belief that this worldview that he has, but also part of it is just showing how his worldview interacts with science and interacts with everyday questions that come up and things like that. Did you get that impression at all?
Yeah, well, everybody's worldview, one of the main key aspects of someone's worldview, as far as plausibility, is does it answer the big questions in life, or does it help? Does it help you justify some of your beliefs on the big questions in life? Where did we come? My wife calls it the Cotton Eye Joe. Where did you come from? Where are we going to go?
Okay.
Cotton Eye Joe. Well, how do you live your life? How should we treat other people?
You're not going to sing the song?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right.
Do you want me to?
No, actually, no.
Okay, yeah. So I think part of the worldview, your worldview encompasses that. And so while some of this doesn't directly maybe tie into naturalism, to me they kind of go hand in hand, right? Because if you're a naturalist, this is probably what you're going to believe. And I know it's not a monolithic group, I get that, but it just seems to me that he's making a defense of his kind of branch or stamp of naturalism and trying to answer some of the big questions in his worldview. So it didn't seem out of skew to me, but obviously, coming from the other camp, it seemed pretty okay. This would seem like, this is what he would want to talk about. Right.
I think one thing is clear is that he's had people question him about his worldview, because it seems like, like some of these things he put in because he knows people that have asked him about it before. And so,
he's had some pushback on some things.
Right.
And there were even a few times where I'm like, yeah, but what about this? And then he came back and he's like, well, some of you guys might be thinking, or, somebody once said, and then he went right into that. So that,
so are you saying that he prophesied what you were going to ask him?
Maybe I say it was just random chance.
Interesting. Okay. Just out of curiosity, how do you feel he's doing with his defense?
Well,
so far,
well, you know what? This chapter was really meaty. Like there was a lot there. And while I would disagree with probably much of what he said, it was breath of fresh air to hear him try to go and defend it as well. Okay. So like when you and I talk, you usually don't presuppose things, or if you do presuppose them, you'll try and at least give a defense or justification of why. And it's funny that you mentioned that you two kind of, a lot of things are very similar as far as your worldview goes, because the whole time I was thinking, there is no way Scott has not read this book before. Like I was thinking, man, there's so many things in here that you've yourself said. And so I found that interesting. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember I brought up that objection.
So you thought I must have taken it from him or something?
Pulled a fast one. No,
I swear I haven't read anything from Richard Carrier before, actually.
It just was kind kind of uncanny how the two of you have very similar. I think the thing that bothers me about him, he's very, as a matter of fact, in a way, it's almost like, yeah, and this is it. Yep. And that's it. Next. Almost like, oh, it's cut and dry. But I think part of that is obviously in defense of time. I'm so used to talking to you where we have both sides. And so if you disagree with me, you're going to stop me and we're going to talk about things. If I disagree with you, I'm going to stop you. I wanted to push the pause button so many times and have a discussion with him. Like, okay, wait. What did you mean by that? And what about this? And what about that? But I like the fact that he's trying to justify each of these claims, even if I don't think he's successful. I appreciate that because, one of the main critiques of Christians towards naturalists, particularly in debates, is the naturalist a lot of times doesn't bring affirmative arguments for naturalism. It's just, I don't like Christians. I don't like what they do. Look how bad you guys are. And that's what you see a lot of times. And there isn't a defense of naturalism. But I'm seeing that he's at least presenting justifications, even though I might disagree with him.
Yeah, that was I kind of pictured you as, I tried to imagine, okay, what's Jamie going to think about this? How's he going to react to this? And that's really that I mentioned earlier about my continuing frustration with the lack of footnotes. And so, that was really what bothered me the most. Yeah, I wanted to if there's a couple of times when he said something and I wanted to look it up, like he was talking about the B theory of time, and he was saying, physicists believe this, and so I wanted to say, okay, tell me what physicists believe it, and I want to look, I want to see what they say about it. I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. Yeah. But really, this is a defense of his position, and so the target audience should be people like you. Yeah. Right. You would think, and so. If you, as you're reading it, then, like you said, you're reading through it and you appreciate that he's making the attempt, but you didn't think he was successful. That is the moment that I wish that you could look down to a footnote and say, okay, here's a bigger argument. And so here's where I flesh out, or here's where I got this from.
Right. Because I had so many other questions that follow. And I felt like they were assertions a lot of times. Right. Even though I don't think they were, because I think that he has his own justification for them, and that the justification is probably fine. But it just felt like he was asserting them because there wasn't the footnotes or I don't want to say appeal to authority, but hey, so and so has said this, and such a theory has backed up this, and Right. So, yeah, I can appreciate that frustration. I just enjoyed the fact that he was trying to defend certain things, and seems to be on the fringe of scholarship in this way, that I don't think and I could be totally wrong. It seems like he doesn't really care much what some people think, because there's certain things that he said. Like, I think he's the kind of guy, he's like, I'm just going to tell you what I think. And I'm not going to worry about whether or not, somebody agrees or disagrees, or because he was very blunt and kind of very just out there on some of his, I'll tell you a couple things that bothered me was, he had mentioned a couple times before and a couple times in this chapter about relying on the consensus of a particular body of people, say we're dealing in biology or whatever. But he takes such a radical view with the historical Jesus. I just keep thinking about he is a historian. And yet he takes it, and it's an overwhelming consensus, not like 51%.
I know he's written at length on that subject, though. Have you read any of his work? Are you familiar with his scholarship?
Yes, I have read his. I have one book here about his. It's actually on Audible about Jesus, the historical Jesus. That's not what it's called, but it's about the historical Jesus. So, and I'm not a historian, so. All I can do is read it and judge it based upon the information that I know about history, and I just don't think that he's able to justify, like he just makes such a big deal about appealing to this consensus. Hey, I think we should go with the consensus of authority, but then he doesn't on such a big thing, and not even like, there's only like 55%. Like we're talking like 95% of historians or New Testament scholars or whatever believe Jesus was a real historical figure. And so I'm surprised that he takes such a fringe view when he's advocating, and I think rightfully so, that, hey, and maybe he's doing this because he is a scholar in that field, and so maybe he feels at liberty, like, hey, you should take the consensus if you're not an expert in the field. Okay. But if you're an expert, I'm not saying he's doing this, I'm saying maybe this is his thought process. But if you're an expert in the field, then you can know better.
Right.
So you might not agree with the consensus, but it's based upon your own primary field. And so maybe that's how he stands on that. I don't know, but that bothered. And there was only one other thing there were a lot of things that bothered. Only one other thing really worth mentioning is in some of his theology, I think either he's gotten it wrong or he doesn't quite understand. In one instance, he talks about.
Wait, are we straying from this book?
No, it's this book. Yeah, he talks about how if God could do anything, if God can do anything, if God could do anything, but God can't do anything, and it's been, that's pretty well established since, even the early church fathers. The verbiage or the idea is that God could do that which is logically possible, and that which accords with His own nature. So it's not like God, because he talked about, why couldn't God create a world in which X, Y, or Z? And he says, if God can do anything, but we don't think God can do anything. And he also was wondering, he has no idea why God created a world with human beings. I'm like, you don't know? Like why the vast majority of Christians believe God created human beings? So I was just taken back. I thought that maybe he could bone up on his theology, or maybe, and he called people like Thomas Aquinas like antiquated and out of date. Right. And I'm like, man.
Well, he is.
He is antiquated. Right. He is, but it almost made it sound as if, oh yeah, this really isn't anybody. And I'm thinking, man, really? Okay, so maybe
that's
that
different
was
than the impression I got on that part. I see your point of view there.
So what did you think overall?
Well, before we do that, I want to quick finish. I want to make sure we get out there all this other stuff that he talked about, and then we can we can circle back around here. He also talked a lot about determinism and free will, which I thought was very interesting. Yes, and that was something that you and I hadn't really talked about before, or at least not at length. And so I was just curious, what is your perspective on free will? He promoted determinism as the correct view of the functioning of the universe, and he also and there's different perspectives on that as how it relates to free will. There are people that say, like Sam Harris, for example, says that we don't have free will, that it's an illusion. I happen to disagree with Sam on that, and I actually it was this topic where I really started thinking, yeah, that's exactly what I think, because I've always been kind of a determinist and a compatibilism, he called it, a version of free will. Also, Daniel Dennett, philosopher Daniel Dennett, also calls that kind of free will the kind of free will worth having, right? And so he talked about how it was compatible with determinism, but then he also talked about libertarian free will, and the evangelist J.P. Moreland. He used some of his work as kind of the background of that. What is your take on, just give me the brief, we don't want to make this bit too long, but what's your brief position, or what's your thoughts on free will and how it relates to what he was talking about here? Well,
J.P. Moreland isn't an evangelist. He's a philosopher of the mind. He's not just a lay preacher. You know what I'm saying?
Right. But
he,
I had in my notes evangelical philosopher J.P. Moreland, and I didn't read it correct.
His big thing is philosophy of the mind, and so I've actually read some of his work. A lot of it's over my head, but some of it isn't. I think that one of the things he misunderstands about free will is he kept referring to freedom of the will is choosing to do what you want.
Right.
But that's not libertarian free will. Libertarian free will is
choosing to do what you want. Yeah, he was saying that was the position he was promoting. And he was saying that libertarian free will was that the decisions that you make are completely uncaused.
That freedom of the will is having a choice to do otherwise and actually being able to do otherwise. So we're talking now, and I actually had a real choice in the matter that I could have not talked to you tonight on the microphone. So as Christians, the whole idea of free will, we have a various array of people in our own camp as well. The same as your camp. So we have Christians like myself who believe in libertarian free will, that there is a first mover, a thing called a soul. He kept bringing up, well, J.P. Moreland doesn't know what this thing is, this first prime mover. Well, he does. It's the soul. That is that thing that is you. When you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I am Scott, or I say, I am Jamie. I'm talking about that immaterial soul, which obviously naturalists don't believe in. So we would say that is the thing that ends up making the choices, and that there are other things obviously involved that help influence our choices, but ultimately we can make choices that go completely against what we want to do. We see that in battle, people running towards something. Everything about them says go, run, hide, but they do something anyhow. So that's the camp I fall into. But also within Christendom, we have compatibilists and determinists, fatalists. So we have some people who believe that God has preordained from the foundation of the world
determinist would be different than a fatalist. He distinguished between determinism and fatalism. They're different things.
I do remember that. In our camp, it is not. It's the same thing. So I don't
know. What do you mean by that? What do you mean in your camp?
As a Christian, so we have
people use the term the same way.
Yeah, no, it almost is interchangeable because it basically means the same thing, that ultimately you are determined, especially in Christianity, because we believe the future is known by God. And so you are, some people in Christendom believe you are fated to do certain things.
Okay.
And because God knows them, you have no choice but to do otherwise. That this is what you're going to do, and that God has preordained everything, the good and the bad, every minute.
You're talking
detail.
About Calvinism, right?
Yes, hyper Calvinism.
Or at least a variation of that. Okay.
Yep. And then there's the compatibilist who believes that God determining these things is also compatible with our free will, which I think it's a cop out. I at least in the Christian sense, the way they say, well, I'm a compatibilist. When you ask them, okay, well, what causes you to do things? What causes you, for instance, to sin? And they'll say, well, it's our sin nature. Okay, well, how did you get your sin nature? Well, Adam and Eve in the garden, and now I have the sin nature. Okay, well, then either God's unjust because he's blaming you for something that you didn't do, ultimately, because Adam sinned. Now you have that sin nature. Now you're going to sin and be damned for it. Or God has given you that in your nature, that either Adam has made you culpable or God is culpable, but not you. So we have that freedom of the will, which is libertarian. We have compatibilists as well. And I would and determinist or fatalist, or however we flesh that out eventually. But I would say I definitely fall into the libertarian free will camp-esque.
Okay.
So I'm sure there's some shades in there.
So I think we got. I think we have some. We found some ripe fruit, possibly to serve as a future episode there.
Yeah, it'll be a good one.
Because, of course, everything that you just said was just bullshit. So anyway, so now next time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's beautiful. That's
Right? Was
great.
that matter of fact enough?
Yeah, it's perfect, buddy. I love it.
Okay. All right. So before we finish up here, the last little bit, he was talking about what everything is made of. And he talked about space time, talked about matter and energy, physical laws, abstract. He spent a lot of time talking about abstract objects. And basically the idea is that he was saying that this is all consisting of patterns of energy in space time and different things. I thought that was really interesting. But he finished up that section, and this was the last little bit that we read on reductionism. And at the risk of making this thing another 10 minutes long, I'm going to ask you, what was your thought on his presentation on reductionism?
Well,
and just quick for the listeners there, reductionism is the idea that every mode of thinking can be reduced to like a lower level. For example, he said that psychology can be reduced to biology. So in other words, if you know everything about somebody's biology, you can kind of predict what their psychology is going to be like. And then biology reduces down to chemistry. So if you know everything there is to know about organic and biological chemistry, then you can predict biology, and that chemistry all boils down to physics and so on. So that's basically what reductionism is, at least in this context. What was your
I thought he presented a good overview of it, and I think that it's spot on if you're a naturalist.
Okay.
I think it makes absolute complete sense if you're a naturalist. So I mean, I think it is the game in town.
I agree.
If you're a naturalist. Yep. So
okay.
That's I'm assuming that's what you thought too, that it was that is
I did.
That's the way to go.
Yep. I would call myself a reductionist there as well.
Yep.
Okay, so that was our reading for this last section. Now for the next part, we're going to be reading the rest of chapter 3 or part 3. I'm not exactly sure what he's calling these different divisions, but basically, if you look in the table of contents of the book, it's fairly obvious what I'm talking about. But in the print version, it's going to be pages 135 to 208. So we're finishing the rest of chapter 3 or part 3 or whatever it is. And so that's going to be for next time on the God or Not Book Club. And that about wraps it up for episode lucky number 13. So please send us your ideas, questions, and comments to email@godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to know more about the topics covered in this episode, Jamie recommends...
I recommend the book called Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey. In this episode of Prejudice, we talked about some LGBTQIA issues. And this book, Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey, talks a lot about issues that our society is facing and people are facing with gender issues and things where their biology isn't matching with their psychology and things like that. And so she covers some of these issues that move in and around the whole transgender and sexual things, talking about LGBTQ. And so it was a very interesting read, and it's not your stereotypical Christian Bible bashing kind of, like I'm going to beat you over the head with the Bible type of thing. It's actually pretty mild and modest, and I think it's logical. And she gives kind of the history behind some things. It's called Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey.
All right.
What do you recommend, Scott?
I recommend, actually, I'm not recommending a book this week. I'm recommending a TV show. And this is a show, it's a Netflix show, so it's available on Netflix now. So maybe when you're done listening to this podcast, you can go check it out. It's by a man by the name of Derren Brown, and he fancies himself as a psychological illusionist. He's very famous in the UK. He has like a stage show, and he does, it's not really hypnotism, but it's more like psychological manipulation kind of thing. And so he did a show. The first time I saw him on Netflix, he did a show called The Push. And basically the idea was that they wanted to see if they could kind of convince somebody, a person off the street, if they could convince them to murder a stranger. I know it sounds kind of dark, but, and they show all the behind the scenes, everything. And no one's ever really in any danger at any point. But the person who's being manipulated is unaware of what's going on. So it was really fascinating. So, but the second show of his that Derren Brown did is called Sacrifice, and I thought this one was appropriate for our topic here today, and because Prejudice what played a central role in this one. So Derren Brown was like, okay, so the first one was, can we talk somebody into murder somebody? In this one, can we talk somebody into taking a bullet for a stranger, and not just a stranger, but a stranger that is a person that they are prejudiced against. It's person from a group that they are that they're against. And so I won't give away too much of the show, but it's really fascinating. It's very emotional, and I'll warn you ahead of time. Make sure you clear your schedule for an hour, because you're not going to want to stop. And so that's called Derren Brown, Sacrifice. And Derren spells his first name Derren. Brown, of course, spelled normally, Sacrifice. And so that's on Netflix.
Terrific.
All right. So thanks, everyone, for joining us this episode. And we hope you'll be back with us next time, when Jamie and I will be talking about the fine-tuning of the universe. Until then, this is your dialectic duo reminding you to talk to each other.
See ya.
This has been the God or Not podcast. Send your questions or comments to email at godornotpodcast.com. If you'd like to support the show or grab some God or Not gear, please visit the website at www.godornotpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.